He was the boy on the milk carton, a face that became the image of every parent's worst nightmare, an icon of innocence lost that seared a generation. But before the symbol, he was just a 7-year-old boy in a quiet, artistic neighborhood of New York City, taking his first step toward independence, a single block that would swallow him whole. The day was a Friday, May 25th, 1979, and the air in SoHo, New York City, was humming with a familiar, creative energy. This wasn't the SoHo of today, a labyrinth of high-end fashion and bustling crowds. This was a SoHo still finding its identity, a neighborhood of converted warehouses and artists' lofts. It was a close-knit, almost bucolic community where neighbors knew each other and children played on the cobblestone streets without a second thought. It was a place where doors were left unlocked and trust was the currency of the community. In the center of this world lived the Patz family. Stan and Julie Patz were artists, a photographer and a teacher, who had chosen to raise their 3 children in this vibrant, unconventional world. Their youngest, Etan Patz, was a bright, curious 7-year-old with sandy brown hair and a mischievous spirit. He was known for his polite manner, his love of Star Wars, and his desire to grow up. He was at that age, a beautiful threshold between childhood dependence and the first taste of freedom. That morning, Etan was brimming with excitement. It was the last day of school before the long Memorial Day weekend, a holiday filled with promises of barbecues and summer adventures. He had been lobbying his parents for weeks, asking to be allowed to walk to the school bus stop alone for the first time. The walk was just a short 2-block journey, a simple stroll that generations of city kids had made without incident. His mother, Julie, had hesitated at first, but she and Stan had decided this was the day. It was a small, pivotal step in a 7-year-old's life, a moment of earned trust that symbolized a rite of passage. And so, at 8 a.m., Etan Patz, wearing a dark red t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers, a small backpack slung over his shoulder, took the first step out of his family's apartment building at 113 Prince Street. His mother watched him from the stoop, a mixture of pride and a faint, almost imperceptible anxiety. He walked down the street, turning the corner, and a few seconds later, he was out of sight. That was the last time she or anyone else in his family would ever see him again. The day's routine continued, oblivious to the fact that the most ordinary of mornings had just taken a turn into a long, permanent shadow. The sun climbed higher, the city's rhythms quickened, and still, no one noticed. A few minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The school bus arrived at the corner of Prince and West Broadway and pulled away without Etan on it. His teacher, not concerned at first, simply marked him absent. This was New York City, after all. A kid could be late, his parents could have a change of plans. But at the end of the school day, the bus returned, and Etan was still not on it. His teacher, now with a hint of concern, called his parents. When Julie Patz answered the phone, her heart sank. She and Stan, believing he had gone to school as planned, had been going about their day. Stan, a photographer, had been working in his home studio. They had no reason to believe anything was wrong. A small, chilling knot of fear began to form in Julie's stomach. The Patz family immediately sprang into action. They called Etan's friends and their parents, thinking he might have gone to play at someone's house. But no one had seen him. They checked the local playground, the candy store, the places a 7-year-old might go on a Friday afternoon. As the minutes turned into hours, the fear intensified, morphing from a small knot into a cold, hard stone in the pit of their stomachs. The sun began its slow descent over the city, casting long shadows that seemed to mock the growing darkness in their hearts. By nightfall, the truth was undeniable. Etan was missing. The police were called, but their initial response was slow and methodical, treating the case as a potential runaway. The idea of a child abduction in this idyllic bohemian neighborhood was a foreign concept, a storyline from a movie, not a lived reality. But Stan Patz, a man who documented the world, knew a story of this magnitude when he saw it. He organized a search party of neighbors, artists, and friends who fanned out across the city, their voices calling out a name that would soon be known across the world. The search for Etan Patz had begun, a hunt that would last for decades, forever changing a city and a nation. The morning after Etan's disappearance, the city woke up to a nightmare. The news of the missing boy spread quickly, and the quiet, artistic community of SoHo was transformed into a police station and a hub for volunteers. The NYPD, now fully mobilized, launched a full-scale search, but they had no crime scene, no ransom demand, and no clues. The trail was as cold as the cobblestones in the morning light. The only thing they had was a photograph, a smiling boy with sandy brown hair and a mischievous glint in his eye. It was this image that would become a beacon for the search. Stan and Julie Patz, desperate to find their son, began to plaster the city with flyers. Etan's face was everywhere, on lampposts, bus stops, in shop windows. The community rallied around them, but the sheer scale of the city made the search feel hopeless. A famous poster artist even created a black and white print of Etan's face, a powerful and haunting image that would come to symbolize the case. The media descended on the Patz family, their cameras and microphones a constant, invasive presence. But the family, in their raw grief, used the attention to keep the search alive. They became a public face of a private tragedy, a symbol of every parent who had ever lost a child. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation was at a standstill. There were no leads, no sightings, and no ransom demands. The police, with no other options, began to consider a suspect who was living among them. A neighbor, a friend, a local business owner. The trust that had once defined the SoHo community began to fray, replaced by a quiet paranoia. Neighbors looked at each other with suspicion, and every stranger was a potential threat. The idyllic SoHo that Etan had grown up in was gone, replaced by a city of fear and suspicion. This was not just a missing persons case. It was the story of a community losing its innocence. The world was now a scarier place, and Etan Patz, the little boy who had wanted to be big, was a living embodiment of that fear. The case remained a mystery, and as the months turned into years, Etan's name became a symbol for every missing child in America. His photograph was printed on milk cartons, a brilliant and haunting idea that would forever link him to a generation. He was the boy on the milk carton, an image that seared a generation's consciousness. But behind the image, he was still just a little boy who had vanished without a trace, and the mystery of his disappearance remained a gaping wound for his family and the city of New York. The case was cold, but the memory of Etan Patz was kept alive, a constant reminder of a community's innocence lost. As the 1980s began, the initial media frenzy around Etan Patz's disappearance began to subside, but the family's private agony did not. They lived in a constant state of limbo, unable to mourn and unable to move forward. Stan Patz, an artist himself, used his skills to keep his son's face in the public eye. He worked tirelessly to create and distribute new missing person posters, with each flyer becoming a new testament to his unwavering hope. But the investigation itself was hitting a wall. The police were no closer to finding Etan or a solid suspect. The case went cold, joining the countless other unsolved mysteries in the annals of American law enforcement. Yet this case was different. It had captured the nation's imagination in a way others had not. In a bold and unprecedented move, Stan Patz teamed up with a local dairy company to print his son's image on milk cartons. The idea was simple but revolutionary: turn an everyday household item into a constant, haunting reminder of a missing child. The image of Etan Patz, with his trusting eyes and small smile, was suddenly everywhere, in kitchens, schools, and grocery stores across the country. He became the face of a national crisis, a silent plea for information that a generation of Americans grew up with. The image on the milk carton sparked a new era in the search for missing children, making Etan Patz a symbol of a lost innocence. But the campaign's success did not bring the Patz family any closer to the truth. Instead, it brought a flood of false leads, anonymous tips, and cruel hoaxes that only served to deepen their pain. The case was a psychological battle, with the Patz family fighting to keep their hope alive while the city around them tried to forget. As the years turned into a decade, the case faded from the front pages, but it never left the minds of the detectives who had worked on it. The file, thick with reports and dead ends, was periodically reviewed, but the physical evidence was minimal. Without a body, Without a confession, without a witness, the case remained a frustrating and painful mystery. The world had moved on, but for the Patz family, time had stopped on that Friday morning in May 1979. For over 2 decades, the case of Etan Patz remained a cold case, a ghost in the annals of New York City crime. The original detectives retired, the media moved on, and the milk carton campaign, once so powerful, became a relic of a bygone era. The Patz family, in their quiet anguish, continued to live in the same apartment building on Prince Street, a living monument to their son's disappearance. Stan Patz, in a cruel twist of fate, had become a quiet fixture on the street, his life defined by the one event he couldn't photograph, couldn't document, couldn't solve. But in 2001, on the 22nd anniversary of Etan's disappearance, the NYPD reopened the case. A new generation of detectives, armed with fresh eyes and modern techniques, began to re-examine the old files. They started by focusing on the people who had been in the SoHo neighborhood on the day Etan disappeared. The list was long, and at the top was a man named Pedro Hernandez, a stock clerk who had worked at a corner bodega near Etan's apartment. He had been interviewed briefly in the initial investigation but had never been considered a prime suspect. His name was just one among many, a footnote in a massive case file. The detectives' renewed focus on Hernandez was a stroke of quiet diligence. They reviewed his original interview tapes and noticed inconsistencies. Hernandez had moved to a new state shortly after the disappearance, and he had never spoken about his time in SoHo. He was a man with a troubled past, a history of mental health issues, and a quiet demeanor that masked a hidden darkness. The detectives, in their re-examination, also looked at the original police investigation and discovered that some witnesses had recalled seeing a stock clerk from the local bodega speaking to a young boy who matched Etan's description on the day of his disappearance. This was a detail that had been overlooked in the initial chaos of the investigation, a needle in a haystack of thousands of tips. The investigation now had a new focus, a new suspect, and a new hope. The police began to dig deeper into Hernandez's life, and they found a shocking secret. In a quiet moment of confession, he had admitted to a family member that he had done something bad to a little boy in New York City. The confession, though cryptic, was the first real break in the case in over 2 decades. The investigation had now moved beyond the public spectacle and into a quiet, methodical hunt for a single, terrifying truth. The detectives, armed with this new information, knew they were on the verge of solving a case that had haunted the city for a generation. The boy on the milk carton, once a symbol of a lost innocence, was about to become a very real and tragic story of a crime solved. After decades of silence, the case of Etan Patz found its voice in the spring of 2012. The reopened investigation had led detectives to Pedro Hernandez, who had moved to Maple Shade, New Jersey. The police, armed with their new information, brought him in for questioning. What followed was a stunning and controversial interrogation that would finally, after 33 years, put a face to the monster. During the questioning, Hernandez's calm demeanor began to crack. He was a man with a documented history of mental health issues, a quiet man who had lived in the shadows for decades. As the detectives pressed him, he began to speak, his voice a low, halting whisper. He confessed to luring Etan Patz into the basement of the bodega he worked at, promising him a soda. He said he choked the boy, and then, in a terrifying and tragic detail, he said he put the body in a plastic bag and left it with the curbside trash. He was a simple stock clerk who had committed an unimaginable crime, a man who had lived his life with a terrible secret locked away in his mind. But the confession was not a clean one. It was filled with inconsistencies, a lack of detail, and an almost dreamlike quality. Hernandez's lawyers argued that their client's mental state made him susceptible to coercion, that the confession was not a true account, but a product of a troubled mind trying to please the police. The lack of a body and the absence of any physical evidence made the confession the only real link between Hernandez and the crime. The case was no longer a simple hunt for a missing boy. It was now a complex legal battle, a high-stakes game of proving a confession. The revelation of Hernandez's confession sent a shockwave through New York and across the country. The boy on the milk carton, once a symbol of a national tragedy, was now a real person with a known killer. For the Patz family, the confession was a moment of profound and terrible closure. Stan Patz, who had lived his life in the shadow of his son's disappearance, now had a face to his pain. But for the rest of the world, the confession left a bitter taste. The case of Etan Patz was not a clear-cut victory, but a reminder of how little we truly know, and how a single terrible act can change a family, a community, and a nation forever. The trial of Pedro Hernandez began in 2015. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on the shaky confession, a story told by a man with a troubled past. The defense painted a picture of a man who was easily led, a man who had confessed to a crime he didn't commit under the pressure of a long and grueling interrogation. The jury, unable to come to a consensus, was deadlocked, and a mistrial was declared. But the prosecutors were not deterred. In 2017, a second trial began. This time, the prosecution presented a more focused case, and a jury, after a long and difficult deliberation, finally reached a verdict. Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of the murder of Etan Patz. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. For the Patz family, the verdict was a moment of release, a final chapter in a long, painful book. Stan Patz, in a victim impact statement, spoke of his son's legacy, not as a victim, but as a boy who had changed a nation. He said that for 33 years, Etan's case had been a symbol of all missing children, and that now it was a symbol of justice. But the case of Etan Patz remains a complex and tragic one. The lack of a body and the absence of any physical evidence leave a lingering, unsettling question in the minds of many. The finality of the verdict, while bringing closure to the Patz family, does not erase the mystery of what truly happened to the little boy who wanted to be big. The boy on the milk carton, once a symbol of lost innocence, became a symbol of a long, difficult road to justice, and a reminder that some wounds never truly heal. The disappearance of Etan Patz was more than just a crime. It was a cultural event that had a profound and lasting impact on a generation. Before Etan, parents in New York City and across the country felt a quiet, almost naive sense of safety. They let their children walk to school alone, play outside unsupervised, and ride their bikes without a helmet. Etan's disappearance changed all that. The world, in an instant, felt a little smaller, a little more dangerous. The image of a boy on a milk carton became a symbol of a world where a parent's trust was no longer a given. It was a loss of innocence for an entire generation. The story of Etan Patz is not just a tale of a boy who vanished, but a story of how a single event can have a ripple effect that changes a society forever. It is a powerful reminder that justice, even if it takes 33 years, can be found. But it is also a somber lesson that some mysteries, even when solved, leave a gaping hole in our hearts. Etan Patz was the boy who went to walk to school, and in doing so, he taught a nation a terrifying, unforgettable lesson about the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the face of a great tragedy, hope and justice can prevail.